Hello and welcome to the Lose Weight Feel Great Summit. My name is Joanna Peterson. I have with us today Dr. Pelletier. He's going to show us and tell us all about genes, DNA, and epigenetics, genetics and epigenetics. And I'm so grateful that you're here today. I'm so excited you made it in such a short notice. And it's one of the biggest treats to have you on. So thank you, Dr. Pelletier.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. I really like the theme of your conference, so I'm very happy to participate. And again, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And I would like to introduce you to the audience. Dr. Pelletier is a pioneer of integrative medicine, a clinical professor of medicine, an author of many books. One of them is Change Your Genes, Change Your Life, Life New Medicine, and Sound Mind and Body.
Yes.
Is that how it's called?
Sound Mind, Sound Body. Mm-hmm.
Mind as Slayer, Longevity Fulfilling Our Biological Potential.
Yes.
All that being said, you got a big background. Can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell me and the audience how you got into this field?
Well, it's interesting because it actually traces back to Greece, which may seem surprising. But when I was in medical school, I dropped out for a year and lived in Zurich. And I chose Zurich because it was central to be able to travel all through Europe, the Near East, North Africa. And in the course of that, I ended up in Greece, which I love. And there's a small island, Tinos. And Tinos has a chapel on that island, which for the Greek Orthodox is like Lourdes for the Christians. It's a place where miracles occurred. And I was sleeping under a fig tree on the beach in a sleeping bag. And all of these people began descending on this little island. And I didn't know anything about it, but I saw people that were clearly in major pain. They'd go into this little chapel and come out and be moving and laughing and pain-free. Saw other people with gnarled limbs from degrees of arthritis and trauma, and they would come out walking and flexible. Now, I didn't see eyes regrow, I didn't see limbs regenerate, but everything I saw made me stop to think, this is not the biology that I'm learning about. This is not the biology overall. So when I came back to UCSF, I then started to work on research with people that could have a remarkable degree of regulation or control over their mind-body system. So these were adept meditators, and they could skewer themselves with large diameter knitting needles and would not experience pain, would not bleed, would not exhibit infection. And that was, for me, the first realization that the mind, our belief systems, the interaction between mind and body was much more profound than anything that I had ever been taught. And ever since then, up to the present time, I'm still exploring that. And more impressed how now with genetics, we can see how the mind not only affects our organs, our brain, our nervous system, it actually affects us right down to the level of the gene in a single cell in our body. To me, that's astounding.
Yes, very astounding. And how does food impact the body and genetics?
Right. Well, the biggest, I think, misconception, taking a step back, that people have is that genetics is like a hard drive on your computer, a set of invariant laws that govern everything about our lives, the hair color, height, food preferences, diseases we will get, how long we will live, etc. And that's simply not accurate, not at all. Less than 5% of what we are as adults is due to our strict genetic inheritance, and that's another different conversation. But epigenetics means, epi means around, above, or surrounding. So it's all of the influences around, surrounding, and above that influence genetic expression. So genes, my book title, Change Your Genes, is a bit of a gotcha title. Our genes don't change. They're invariant. What does change is expression. whether or not a gene you have for a particular quality gets expressed or stays dormant or is actually actively suppressed, if it's a good one, it's suppressed, is dependent on everything we do. And in kind of a long-winded answer to your question, diet is the single most well-documented, clear impact on genetic expression for optimal states of health, which interests me more than disease, but also in the expression and prevention of every major chronic disease.
So what you're basically saying, if we're having a healthy diet without pesticides, we can actually change our DNA.
We can change the expression. Of DNA.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. Absolutely. So organic diets free of chlorophos and other kinds of pesticides. Roundup is a very, very toxic carcinogenic agent. It's recognized as a carcinogen by the World Health Organization. The United States FDA, in its wisdom, has failed to make that statement, but the evidence is actually, if you look at the research, it's overwhelming. That Roundup is a deadly carcinogenic agent that we're all ingesting. There was a study done about 6 months ago looking at phytoplankton, single cell organisms in Antarctica. And they found that in these single cell organisms, there is Roundup. Wow. So we have literally poisoned the planet with this carcinogenic agent. And the estimates are that we consume about 11 pounds of herbicides and pesticides per year, even if we're eating supposedly organic foods. So this is a serious issue, and those phytochemicals, those herbicides, pesticides, have a direct negative impact on the genes and on gene expression. So the opposite of that, then the good news, is organic foods and very specific kinds of foods affect our biochemistry in ways that are very positive, that it create optimal health, extends our life expectancy, prevents many diseases, and allows us to live with full vitality. But again, it has to be natural, as you know, in foods means nothing. That's a word made up by the food industry to convince us that something is organic. The word natural has no meaning whatsoever, legally or in terms of food substances. Organic is the only word that is restricted in its use to foods that in fact are grown under very specific conditions. So that's the magic word. The other thing that I always advise people with food selection is select the shortest label.
Yeah.
So if you have two breads, one has 10 ingredients, the other has 15, select the one with 10. Better yet, the one that has 3. So short labels and organic are the two general prescriptives for a healthy diet.
Yeah. And why is that if we go to a McDonald's, and we don't go there, but if we would go to a McDonald's, the ingredients are so much healthier in Europe than they are here. Even if you buy Kraft macaroni and cheese, you compare the ingredients. I was just in Europe and I'm reading the ingredients. They have 12 ingredients. We have like 50 on ours.
Yes.
Why is that? How can the system allow that? I don't understand it.
Well, in the United States, the food industry, so big pharma, big agricultural firms have a disproportionate political influence on the FDA, on food production, on what is and is not allowed in foods, what is and is not allowed to be disclosed. There's a battle going on now as to whether or not food companies can be required to have GMO labeling on their foods. They're resisting that because people don't want GMO produced foods. There's a great deal of uncertainty about the long-term consequences of ingesting GMO foods. We simply don't know. What it may be benign, it might not be, but people are unwilling to take the chance. So the political forces, but in particular the Dairy Council and the meat industry, has a huge influence on the American political system, which in turn regulates what we do and do not have in our foods. In Europe, in Asia, The controls are much more stringent. What is and is not allowed in Germany, in France, in Spain, in England is much more restrictive than in the United States. So when they have, quote, junk foods, they're sort of healthier junk foods. No such thing really, but in a sense, in a gradient, they do have a slightly healthier McDonald's or prepackaged junk food than we do in the United States.
Right. And can you tell us a little bit more about also, all the different diets that we have? We have keto, we have paleo, we have, the celery juice diet. So how does that affect our genes, and what does that really work for everyone?
Well, that is a very good question. It'll take me a bit of time to answer it it's a very good question, and it's one of my favorite things to think about. Whenever I'm at a conference, like you have been, like you just named, you hear about the paleo diet, the ketogenic diet, high fat, low fat. Recently, I was at a conference and they were touting the celery fasting diet. I have no idea what the celery fasting diet is, but that was the new fad.
Yes.
There are different forms of fasting. There's the 1 day a week. There's 3 days a month. There are all kinds of, fasting recommendations. Okay, now those diets are contradictory in their recommendations. High fat, low fat, high carbs, low carbs. Those are directly contradictory. And let me jump to my conclusion. I'll back up from that. The only diet that has absolutely unequivocal research documenting its effectiveness for large numbers of people, all ages, all cultures around the world is the Mediterranean diet. It's the diet characteristic of countries in the Mediterranean area, right around the Mediterranean. So it's Greece, Italy, Spain, France. These are the Mediterranean diet countries. So we can get into what that is, but that's the only diet that has strong documentation. So about a year and a half ago, the Journal of the American Medical Association did a study of the 10 most popular diets, most of which you've already named. And they wanted to see if at 6 months, did people lose weight? Was there a difference? Was one diet more effective than the other? Because all of them, in addition to their health claims, made weight loss. That's the big rallying point. If you eat this way, you're going to lose weight. And for most people, we need to, and that's the lure. So they looked at these 10 diets, and what they found at the end of 6 months is that every diet, every person lost weight. So they thought, well, they're equal in terms of weight loss. One was not better than the other. Then they followed it out for a year. And what they found at 1 year is that in every diet except for one, all the people had regained their weight. It's called regression to the mean, or everyone that lost weight at 1 year had gained it all back, which we all know from trying diets. The one diet that showed sustained weight loss was Weight Watchers. Now Weight Watchers is not a healthy diet. They're beginning to add in genetic testing, and I think they have the capacity to make a healthy diet, but today it's not. And they do, however, have support groups. They have a person that you work with, or groups that you work with. You can get foods delivered and prepared for you. So they make it very easy to continue their diet. You get support from other people. And so that's really the trick. So any diet, pick a diet today. If you picked any one of the diets that we just named, follow that for 3 months, you will lose weight. No question about that. The trick is, will you still have lost that weight in 1 year? And is that diet sustainable? The answer to those two questions is no. It is not. They're not sustainable diets. They also have extreme negative consequences. So the ketogenic diet is very popular, very high fat. That's basically its characteristic. The Atkins diet was a very ketogenic oriented diet that was popular about 10 or 15 years ago. So it's nothing new. And it is effective for treating epilepsy. Children with intractable epilepsy put on a ketogenic diet, their epilepsy tends to lessen or even reverse. Other than that, rapid weight loss is its promise. It does do that. However, at 6 months, patients that we see that are on a ketogenic diet, their cardiovascular risk factors, their lipids, both total cholesterol and subfractions, are terrible. I mean, they're heading for a heart attack. So it's not a sustainable diet, and it also misses a great many nutrients. So last thing I'll say is that my work and the work that I'm most interested in is the use of genetic assays. So it's not a question of what is the best diet. There's no such thing. The Mediterranean and its variants come close. But it's what is the best diet for you, for your individual biochemistry. And until you know your genetic, blood, and microbiome, your intestinal tract genetics, we have no idea who we are biochemically. So how can we know what's good for us? We really don't. So the only way to do that is to go below the dietary claims and look at our individual biochemistry, which is like our fingerprint. Once you know that, you know exactly what to eat. I mean, you literally know what is the exact diet that works best for you. And that to me is the challenge for the future.
Wow. Yeah, and also I love it. And also when people pay more attention on how does this food make me feel? Like if I have high fat, actually my body works fine. But if my husband has that, he doesn't feel so good on it.
Right.
Do I feel better on intermittent fasting or more on a vegetable diet versus animal protein? So it's just like tapping deeper in. And also there's now tests that are available.
Yes, and you've said something very important, which is paying attention to how your diet makes you feel.
Yeah.
The digestive process for what you eat basically is running its course in about 30 to 45 minutes. The problem is most people don't even spend 30 to 45 minutes eating. They spend 10, 15 minutes, sometimes less, with fast foods at lunch or breakfast. So what you need to do is really pay attention. What do you feel like 30 to 45 minutes after you eat? Do you feel lethargic? Do you feel bloated? Do you feel sated? Do you feel energized? Do you feel sharp? Do you feel moody? I mean, how do you feel is a great way to gauge, are you eating in a way that's healthy for you? And that's the beginning. And then you're right about these genetic assays, because I've done them all because I tried them before I used them with patients. And there were some real surprises. And it would give you an example. If I ask you right now about a glycemic spike. So a glycemic spike is a spike in blood sugar that occurs after we eat anything. And the glycemic spike happens, and then the pancreas kicks in, secretes insulin. The insulin balances it out so the nutrients can be absorbed in the body. So glycemic spike is a very good general indicator of how good a food is for us. Well, if I ask you right now, which food would produce a better glycemic spike, a banana or an Oreo cookie? Which one would you guess?
I would guess a banana, but I know it's the Oreo cookie.
You're too smart. Well, for most people, the banana would produce a healthier response, but, and you hit it on the head, for about 20% of the people, an Oreo cookie produces less of a glycemic spike than a banana. So in terms of glycemic response, you can eat Oreo cookies and tolerate them better than a banana. Now that just, for me, goes, I mean, I wish I was in that camp, I'm not. But that goes counter to everything we think about diet. Same thing with brown versus white rice. If you ask people, which one is better, brown rice or white rice, they'll always say, oh, brown rice. Not true. Again, for about 20% of people, brown rice will spike blood sugar more than white rice. So these are things that we can't really detect in 30 to 45 minutes after our meals. Is much too subtle a change, but these biochemical tests, these epigenetic assays, as they're called, can identify very specific foods. It can get down to say, eat walnuts, not almonds. Almonds are not set up to be digested by your genetic program. Almonds are perfect. I'm sorry, walnuts are perfect, so eat those. So it gets down to a very specific level of dietary tuning.
Mhm. Totally. And how do you feel about fasting? So there's so many things now, intermittent fasting, I've tried it all just like you, because I like to play with things. So for me, intermittent fasting works. I do it a couple weeks here and there, but, I tap into my body, see, do I feel like doing it right now? And if I need to break it, I'll break it. But I change things around, but I do it more for inflammation, detoxification. But how does that affect our genes?
Fasting is a very good practice. There's no question about that. For thousands of years, either through famine, because of food shortages, people have had to fast. And ironically, when you look at people that have been through periods of deprivation due to famine and other conditions, they actually, when they rebound, they're actually healthier than people that are eating, just whatever they want. So fasting is very good. The longest fast I've ever done was 30 days. I just wanted to try it to see what it was like. For me, that was way too long. I mean, it was really bit brutal, but ironically, as you know from fasting, by the end of 30 days, you're not hungry anymore.
Right.
I mean, you just don't feel like eating. Even drinking a vegetable juiced is more than you can tolerate. Feels like you're eating a full meal. So the 30 days is the extreme. If you're voluntarily fasting, for most people, what you've suggested about your own practice, which you have to try it. So for some people, there's a very good book. I've forgotten the name of it, but there's a researcher at UCLA, Victor Longo, Longo, and he's the person who's coined the term intermittent fasting. And he's done research, and he comes from a long-lived village in Italy, like you from your parents' village. And he wrote, he's really been interested in the effect of fasting. So he recommends that you try it like you have. See if one day a week, is that good? Is it one day every 2 weeks? Is it 3 days a month? Is it 2 days every 2 weeks? So you need to really experiment around. And what you find is that the effect of detoxification, the effect of fasting is to detoxify. So the liver basically takes anything that's a toxin, a pesticide, an herbicide, an additive, and it breaks it down. It's a stage one detoxification. It's governed by a gene, a PON1 gene. Once those substances are broken down into water solubles, then PON2, or basically detoxification phase 2 in the liver, bonds it to water, and it's excreted in bowel movements or urine from your body. And detoxification is speeded up, enhanced during periods of fasting when the liver is resting and can really engage in this process. So overall, I'm very much of a strong advocate for intermittent fasting, again, according to what works for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's great for people to try it out and see what works for them. And like you said, even just try it one day and see how your body feels.
Correct.
Yeah.
And usually, and again, as you know, if you do a 3-day fast, the first day or two is difficult. You feel hungry, you feel grouchy, etc. At about when the third day kicks in, by the time you make it to the third day, you're fine. Food, hunger abates, cravings tend to abate. So you're kind of over the hump, if you will. Your body is saying, oh, I get it. You're serious about this. You're not going to be eating for a while. And it kicks into a different metabolic state. And that's what you want to achieve. From 3 days on, you can extend it essentially indefinitely. But again, 3 days for most people is what I would recommend as a maximal fast.
Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit more about hormone disruptors?
Yes, this is the hormone disruptors are the fact that foods, in particular meat products and processed meats, and that includes everything: chicken, turkey, beef, lamb, every single red meat or white meat in the case of pork contains hormones. When these animals are raised, they're injected with hormones, they're injected with steroids to basically bulk them up, to enable them to carry a lot of weight, to retain water, to basically be as heavy as possible when they are slaughtered. The problem is that food chain doesn't end with the slaughter. So that beef, that meat, that processed food, when it is transferred to your dinner plate, you are ingesting hormones. You're ingesting all kinds of substances, other substances as well, that are in that beef. And that gets transferred into your digestive tract. And you then are subject to basically environmental estrogens or environmental hormones. For women, there isn't definitive proof, but I suspect that what we see is the rise in breast cancer is due to hormone, what they call hormone disruptors. Some of the infertility issues that young women are having now, I think are due to exposure to low-grade hormones. So it's a real problem. And if you have a BRCA1 and or BRCA2, which are two genes that if you have them, they basically predispose you to breast cancer. That's what made Angelina Jolie act and have a double mastectomy. I have reservations about that, by the way. I think even if you have a BRCA1 and or BRCA2 gene, there are ways to avoid. There are things you can do to avoid surgery and to avoid high-risk breast cancer. But the best thing in terms of our daily diet is to choose protein sources that are not based on hormones. So you don't need to eat whole beef, meat, anything to obtain adequate protein at all. So rice and beans is a complete protein when you take them together. If you think of, many of the European diets, Central America, Latin American diets have rice and beans. That's a complete protein. There are wheat. If you look at organic wheat, that is a whole protein. Wheat at one point was a whole protein. Before it was, again, Big Pharma decided that large husks made large volume, made more bread, they could make more money. But in doing that, they disrupted the whole protein nature of the wheat crop. So you could eat fish. And again, with regard to fish, you want fish that is line caught and that comes from deep, cold water. So it's haddock, salmon. Those kinds of fish are very, very good. Sardines, extremely good, do not contain hormones, high protein, high antioxidant sources, excellent food source. So you don't, and so if you take fish and you take the matching of grains and lentils for protein, you don't need to eat meat, and you avoid the consequences of the endocrine disrupting hormones that are virtually everywhere in our diet. Last thing I'll say, there was just a study just published a couple of weeks ago. I believe it was in Spain or France, I'm not sure which country. They looked at 63,000 individuals. This is a huge study. And they looked at processed meat. And they asked, with looking at 63,000 people, did processed meat seem to predispose to cancer? The unequivocal answer was yes. Very high percentage of people eating processed sausages, beef, meats, etc., had a much higher incidence of cancer than those who did not. Now, last thing, so I keep saying last thing, but I'm not against red meat. I mean, I'm not an adamant, I'm a pescatarian personally and have been all my life, but I'm not adamantly anti-meat, but it has to be organic, grain-fed, grass-fed, free-ranging, etc. If that is your dietary preference, that's what you need to choose in order to maintain a healthy diet. And you need to moderate and diminish your protein intake. Most people eat far too much protein rather than too little. So that's, again, a danger of a high red meat diet. No. More than you wanted to know, probably.
No, that was great. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was great. So you were talking about how animals are getting injected with hormones in order to get bigger faster. So we have those hormones, and then we have also xenoestrogens that
Yes.
are found in plastics. And, a lot of people are on the go. They use plastic bottles. They buy bottled water. Our food is in plastic containers when we go even to Whole Foods, and they put hot food in the plastic containers. That goes straight into our food as well. What is the effect on the xenoestrogens that we are getting into our body, and how does that affect our genes?
Well, again, you just identified the sources, and the sources are by and large plastic bottles. So all the plastic waters with bisphosphonates in them that are, again, they are endocrine toxins that occur in virtually all bottled water. And so if you think that drinking bottled water is healthier, well, you are certainly, perhaps if you've got lead in your water, it is healthier, but it is not a healthy source of water. So the plastic foods that are contained and warmed up. So you take a microwave sandwich or a microwave fast food, and you wrap it in, and it's wrapped in plastic, and you put it in a microwave oven. The amount of xenoplastic that you're ingesting in that food that's released from the plastic when it's heated is off the scale, certainly beyond things that are tolerable levels for people. Plastic containers, if you keep foods in plastic containers for long periods of time in your refrigerator, the xenoplastics are absorbed into that food. Again, it's a very permeable, plastic seems hard and impermeable. It's not, it's a very permeable substance. So my recommendation is avoid plastic containers. Put your water into a steel or an aluminum even bottle, to use paper for containing foods, just to avoid as much plastic as possible. I mean, certainly one of the things we're becoming aware of is the amount of plastic in the ocean. I'm an avid sailor. I have been a sailor my whole life. And I'm really keeping track of what they call the Great Pacific Vortex, which is a pool of largely plastic waste that's between the west coast of the United States and Hawaii. It's twice the size of Texas. Yeah. And it extends down into the ocean probably a mile. And it's just plastic and junk that whirls around and is brought to bear in the Great Pacific Vortex, which is just pure plastic. So we're poisoning the ocean. And when plastics break down into what are called microplastics, they were ingested by fish, ingested by birds. And there was actually a program on 60 Minutes just this last weekend, which looked at the most isolated islands on the planet to see if plastic waste had made it to those islands. The answer was yes. And it's beginning to decimate seabirds because they don't know it's not food. Yeah. They eat so much plastic, it fills up their intestines. They don't have enough room for food, and they die of starvation with bellies filled with plastic. So it's an anathema. I think something that started out in the 50s as a great breakthrough has turned into a toxin for the planet.
Yeah. And the whales that are eating all the plastic, I had seen some documents that were talking about, all the plastic that our whales and dolphins ingest, and how many are dying these days because of everything we throw in the ocean.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Yes. So excessive use, I'm not saying ban all plastic. That will never happen. We're all used to using it. But to just be conscious day in and day out, do you really need that plastic bag? Do you really want to store your food? I mean, there are glass containers that don't cost much more than plastic containers. Use glass containers for your food. Heat your foods on paper plates. There are organic recycled paper plates in Whole Foods in virtually every store. So again, if we just, as individuals, just pay a little bit, I'm not talking about becoming fanatical about this, just a little bit more attention to what we do day in and day out, cumulatively, we have a huge impact. And you see food companies beginning to pay attention to that. So in the large food chains, you now have large organic food sections in grocery stores. That did not exist 5 years ago. So our choices have a profound impact on big agri, on big food companies. And let's use that power. We have it. Let's use it.
Yes, and together, all of us, we can do it.
Yes, we can.
We can. I have one question that's like sitting in my head, and I want to ask you, when you were talking about the animals and they get slaughtered. So we are mostly water. We're 75% water, and we hold on memory. So when these animals, besides getting injected with medication, antibiotics, and hormones, when they're going through the slaughtering process and the trauma that they experience, and then it's in the meat, right? The trauma, it's in the memory of the meat. So now we are eating that. What kind of effect does that have if it wasn't a happy chicken, as an example, right? That was on the farm and has fun with all the little friends. Or the cows that are out on the grass and are having fun with their friends. So if it's a factory chicken, when they're in cages, what kind of an impact does that have in their emotions? And does that carry on into the meat that we're eating? And do we absorb those emotions as well? Because we're all energy.
Well, let me speculate on this. I don't know if there's any research per se, and I always depend on research, at least at first, if it's available to make to form an opinion. I'm not aware of any research that documents how the stress hormones that occur in animals when they're slaughtered under the conditions you described are transferred. They are transferred. They do exist in the meat. They are transferred into our digestion. I'm not aware of any research looking at the impact of the digestion of these hormones on subsequent human hostility or aggression or psychological disorders. I'm not, there may be, I'm not aware of it. However, having said all that, it's unequivocal that when we eat meat from animals that have been slaughtered, we are consuming more biochemicals, more hormones that are characteristic of fear, characteristic of stress. So adrenal corticotrophic hormones, other kinds of corticosteroids are riddled with that meat. That is unequivocally ingested, and it unequivocally has an effect in our bodies. And I suspect that the result of that would be a hyper responsivity to stress, a tendency to be more stressed out than we might think. There's a friend of mine who's the head of gastroenterology at UCLA School of Medicine, has written a book called The Brain-Gut Connection. And he, as a gastroenterologist, he said, I started the intestinal tract, but I realized that the greatest impact of what we ingest in terms of hormones, pesticides, herbicides, is on the brain. Because the organ of the body that has the most similar receptor sites to the human gut is the human brain. So what we ingest has a direct impact. And he's looking at the effect of hormones in depression, hormones in hyperactivity in children. So my basic response to your very good question, which I don't have a good answer right now, is yes. The other line of thought on that is with heart transplants, which is an area I do know about. Again, a good friend at the University of Arizona School of Medicine did the very early research on the transmission of memory in transplanted hearts. So people that have heart transplants end up articulating memories from the donor, very specific memories of a favorite place they visited or a favorite relative or a book they read. So it's not general information about, oh, they like the outdoors, so the receptor likes the outdoors. No, this is, I like going to the top of Mount McKinley. And that is what the donor ends up wanting to do, go to the top of Mount McKinley. So there's no question about the fact that organs and or foods ingested and transplanted into our human bodies carry memories. And there's a line of genetic research, a little esoteric, but we don't have time for that. But there is a line of research that we actually inherit many epigenetic and genetic characteristics through the foods we eat and through our parents and through our upbringing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I had a good friend that had a liver transplant, and when after the liver transplant, he started eating foods that he would never like before. He started doing different activities. He started looking at life so much more positive because he was always more, closed in, and he wasn't very open, and he was a total different person just after the liver transplant. So he was very grateful to enjoy life with different eyes or a different liver.
That's a very interesting example. Those kinds of observations were made for decades after transplants began, and they were always dismissed. Oh, that's just, your imagination or a fiction, or you're making that up. And now, Gary Schwartz is his name at the University of Arizona. Thanks to his work, we know it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, that's a real event that your friend experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how does the microbiome get affected when we don't eat healthy?
Well, the microbiome is everything between our mouth and our anus. So it's this huge digestive tract. And just in terms of cells, so there are maybe 10 million cells in the human body. There are between 40 and 100 trillion bacteria, viruses, cells, genes in the microbiome. And the microbiome affects every aspect of behavior. It affects weight gain, longevity, our mood, everything. So anything that we eat and ingest upsets that balance. And it's second by second. So whatever you had for breakfast changed your microbiome. And when we eat in a particular way that's disruptive, so when you eat very inflammatory foods, and as going back, red meat is a very inflammatory food. When you eat inflammatory foods, you disrupt the composition of the microbiome. There are about 300 different colonies of bacteria. Each colony contains tens of trillions of cells. So you can imagine the complexity of this system. So we don't know precisely what's going on, but we can detect changes in the number and interaction between these colonies based on what we eat. And the healthier the diet, Mediterranean-oriented diet, the better that balance is among all of the colonies. There are some that are benign, some are neutral, and some are very negative. But they all have a role, they all have a balance, which we can throw out of balance through antibiotics use, through poor food choices, through stress, through any number of influences. But if we maintain a healthy microbiome, we maintain a healthy body, healthy mind.
Yeah. And it affects our brain as well. So if we have a healthy microbiome, our brain is actually better as well.
Absolutely. And then with that mechanism I mentioned earlier, which is the greatest number of receptors in the microbiome, the organ where they have the equal kinds, exact type of receptors is in the human brain. And the connection is the vagus nerve. It's a direct connection between the brain and the gut. There are other peripheral nerve connections, but the vagus nerve is the main connection between the brain and the gut. And now what we're realizing is not just blood and electrical activity, it is biochemical activity that is bidirectionally transferred. So if you're depressed, it affects your gut. If you're out of balance in your intestinal tract, it's going to affect your moods, your depression, your mental alertness, your focus, etc. So it's a bidirectional, interactive, ongoing process. That's what's so fascinating about epigenetics. You get outside of the fixed program model into an artificial intelligence that's completely interactive, ongoing, and influenceable.
Thank you. Is there any piece of advice that you can give the audience regarding something that they can do on a daily routine to just feel better in general and have optimal health?
Well, I think the few things we've been talking about is to try to move your diet toward a Mediterranean diet. And there are many books about that, and you can look it up on the internet and find out what that is. But it's basically, more grains and lentils, fresh fruits and vegetables, fish versus meat, use of olive oil, high grain products, etc. So just moving your diet slowly. You don't have to do this overnight, and it's not like a campaign you've got to get done by the end of the month. But kind of move in that direction. The other is intermittent fasting. To try it, I think it's a very good thing to do. The other is to basically engage in physical activity and stress management. We haven't talked about either of those, but those have a profound influence on your digestive tract. And I guess the last would be what we were suggesting earlier, which is reducing plastic exposure in your life and reducing biochemical, endocrine disrupting exposures. All of those are little steps. And if you just make a checklist and kind of keep that in mind, and as you go through your day, try to adhere to more of these basic principles, you will feel better. No question. You'll have a higher quality of life. You'll also extend your life expectancy, which is another whole subject, but it will actually extend the number of years of life that you will live.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful advice. Thank you for all the beautiful work that you're doing, all your wisdom. And thank you so much for being here today. I am more than grateful for having the opportunity to show the audience or introduce you to the audience. And they can look you up. You have a lot of YouTube videos and books that people can research, and there is an abundance of information. So thank you so much for your time. I am forever grateful for you doing this.
Thank you, and it's been a great conversation, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.